In today's difficult economic environment, the phenomenon of social entrepreneurship is attracting increasing attention. Volker, who is the Managing Director of the Center for Social Investment at Heidelberg University, and Filipe Santos, who is the Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship at INSEAD, have been looking at some of the issues raised by social entrepreneurship. Filipe and Volker, thank you very much for joining us at INSEAD Knowledge. How would you describe the business case for social entrepreneurship today?
And I think there are 3 or 4 drivers of that increasing involvement. You now have companies that are allocating part of their resources for social entrepreneurial activities, not necessarily to make a profit, but to create an impact. You have companies like Accenture and Danone and many others across the world. So why are they doing that? And I think one reason is that their employees really want it and value it. So as a motivational tool for the employees who want to drive the process and be involved in it, it's a very powerful tool. So our graduates from INSEAD are now saying, I want to work for a company that creates meaning in my life, not only money. And so they will be the best people will go and be retained by the companies that can show that they create an impact in society that's broader than just their own profits. So that's one mechanism. The other is that it's a powerful learning tool. As companies want to learn about how to innovate, how to address growing markets, sometimes markets at the base of the pyramid at in lower cost ways, or how to work with communities where they are embedded. I think social entrepreneurship is a powerful tool to allow people to learn within the organization. And also we have a segment of mid-level managers and professionals in these companies who are really entrepreneurial in attitude and are a bit not fully recognized, and that's an opportunity for them to show their entrepreneurial abilities. So there are, strictly speaking, reasons for companies to get involved. And there's also, I think, a desire from the CEO, from the leadership of the company to say, we have amassed all of these resources and competencies. Can we use them in a way, just in addition to just making profits for our shareholders and company, can we use and leverage our amazing capabilities in a way that benefits our communities and thereby benefiting our brand and our standing in community as well?
Social enterprises bring in more than what just a for-profit company would do. They draw maybe on additional resources. They pull in the volunteer contributions of employees or of outsiders into a program. They may be able to integrate philanthropic donations in cash or resources from foundations in grant format. So by using the term hybrid organization, I would like to point out that social enterprises have more to them than just a for-profit enterprise working for a social mission. They, in many cases, also have a hybrid structure of the resources they use, and that reflects the fact that they have a dual mission, a social mission, as well as the mission of generating revenue and potentially profits from that.
In today's economic environment, can society afford this kind of approach? Or would you actually go so far as to say this is exactly what we need in today's environment?
I think this is one of the approaches that society needs, and exactly because these entrepreneurial efforts are actually very low cost but effective ways of addressing some of the most pressing problems that we have around education of our youth, around healthcare provision, around many other areas which society has not found a good way within our means to provide these services and products. So social entrepreneurship actually creates seeds of innovation in our society, which are then taken up by governments in public policy or by the traditional social sector or by business corporations if there are for-profit models involved, and then can be scaled up and mainstreamed by the other force of society.
You distinguish between profits and values. Profits are easy to measure because we can count them in dollars and cents, but how do you measure values?
Well, it remains a challenge, but in the first stage, I would suggest that we have to distinguish 3 levels of measuring. The first level is that the values included, we have economic returns as one way of representing the success of the company. That's standard. Then we would propose a second level, which may be labeled socio-economic returns. That is exactly all those externalities that do not show on the balance sheet of the company in a regular case, but that occur on a macro level of the economy or society at large. And many of those externalities either have a price or can actually be measured again, or at least have an opportunity cost that can be judged upon. So as a matter of fact, what I call socio-economic returns would be a balance of positive value contributions and costs avoided. And then we have to consider a third level of returns, which might be labeled social returns. And they are the most challenging part of the overall assessment of social impact, which means we are speaking of effects that can partly be measured in monetary terms, sometimes requiring quite demanding methodological efforts in terms of control group studies or longitudinal studies to compare and attribute causal effects. And sometimes we cannot measure in monetary terms, but still use quantitative variables. Let me give you an example. We did one of those studies on the effect of multi-generation housing developments for the care of senior citizens. And it turned out that the cost effect of those multi-generation structures that are facilitated with social worker support, the cost effect was minus 30%. So the overall cost per capita and year was 30% less. But on top, the overall level of social capital, that is the overall network level and the overall level of social connectedness and ties between those people who lived in those developments, was 50% higher than in different neighborhoods in a control group. And on top, the health development of people living there was more positive. So what I'm saying is the social impact can to some extent be measured in quantitative terms using non-monetary variables that we can use in social science, that we can draw from political science or from value studies. And then there remains a final assessment of effects that we may only be able to qualitatively describe, but not measure in quantitative terms. And the overall picture gives us a comprehensive view of social impact.
To some extent, these companies, these social enterprises, are doing things that governments should be doing or could be doing. And there's also an issue of competition with private companies. So there's both a regulatory issue and a competition issue. How would you see dealing with that?
So social entrepreneurship is this process led by individuals who have a particular vision or a particular desire. They focus on a problem that they want to solve and they mobilize resources and they are creative and innovative. They are the social entrepreneurs. As they validate their approach, so we have hundreds, thousands, even millions of social entrepreneurs trying to do different things. Some of them will be more effective than others. They will have captured an important problem in society. They'll have come up with an interesting solution like microfinance to the problem of access to credit for poor people. And they will validate their approach. It seems to have impact according to kind of a particular indicator. It's cost effective, it's sustainable, meaning that it does not need to be always financed, but it actually finds itself, the seeds for sustainability in the model itself. So the question is then what happens next? And what I've noticed is that social entrepreneurs are very pragmatic. They're not very ideological in the sense they're happy to work with the government and push their innovations for the government to be able to deliver or contract them to the government if that's the best mechanism to deliver it to the wide society. Or they're happy to work with companies and for-profit companies if it can become a profitable business, or they work with the social sector if that's the most effective way. So basically they are the creators, the innovators, and then they transition their solution to other institutions in society depending on the problem, on the solution. And then the critical issue is how do you scale up and mainstream some of those seeds that bloomed into a beautiful flower that's having impact, how you take that flower and make it into a forest that change our lives. And that's, I think, is the gap. And that's probably where the government should intervene on the mainstreaming and scaling up and support for scaling up of the validated social entrepreneurial efforts.
This very fact that it is the issue of working for the public good, for a better society. This is also the challenge to the regulatory framework, because our regulatory frameworks tend to keep things apart and regulate separately that actually social entrepreneurs blend, which is on the one hand an explicit public benefit status with all the legal consequences that follow from that, including the tax law consequences. And on the other hand, the boundaries drawn between non-profit or public benefit status and for-profit status. And in certain jurisdictions, those boundaries are very narrow. In other words, they assume that public benefit implies the notion of a gift and not of an investment. And that may be in conflict with the concept of social entrepreneurship, especially when it comes to the startup phase of combining resources in the interest of a certain improvement in society.
Volker, Filipe Santos, Thank you both very much for joining us at INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.